The Immersive Amanuensis is a tool to navigate the rich sea of historic and real-time conversations at the AA. It grew out of the institution but has application in any knowledge-rich organization guided by the principles of investigation and exchange. The interface was designed to seamlessly join the physical and virtual networks of information and social exchange. Through the creation of a mixed reality infrastructure, we will reach out in new and meaningful ways, creating for the first time a truly globally connected network of actors across space and time. The civic ambition of the Immersive Amanuensis is trifold. It can be initialized through a digital interface or physical presence. For the general public, it recommends interactive content produced from within the AA that is relevant to the interests of the user. This library allows the user to choose through which portal they intend to enter the system. For users at the threshold of the AA, it provides a workshop space that exists as a personal archive of content generated and curated by the individual user over time, a memory palace. This model of investigation can be used as a portfolio to enter the AA public as it demonstrates the organization of ideas and process of the user over time. For the members of the AA public, it is a comprehensive and real-time model of exchange, which conveys individual and collective contribution. In a time of global crisis, our ability to achieve togetherness was put to the test. And we faltered. But what could the most wildly ambitious form of this architecture of exchange bring us? In order to better understand the characteristics of this architecture, I studied three things: cybernetic theory, the current conditions of information exchange at the AA, and design of virtual civic spaces. Cybernetics is the study of intelligent systems that have goals and use feedback to achieve those goals.
Giving, say, two explanations at once will be represented by putting a marker of some sort on some of these and saying we're dealing with conversations as the things we study. We're not much interested in what the conversation is about. We're interested in how it takes place. And the hypotheses we test are about how people understand or learn, or what can be known and can't be about processes in conversations.
Conversations, in the broad sense, encompassing all forms of communication which give rise to a transaction, are the most powerful tools for the transmission of information, and the project takes these on as objects of study. I set out to find content related to my studio work and head to the archive to meet with Ed Bottoms, the head archivist. I asked Ed for content related to the cybernetics movement at the AA that may not be yet in the digitized archives and could only be accessed through him. Through a history of interactions, we've built social capital, and he releases this privileged content to me. I now have a responsibility. Through the transmission of this content to my network of associations, this work is put into the AA timeline in its appropriate vintage, and through the architecture of the newly formed Immersive Amanuensis, it is retroactively linked to other content that preceded it through a system of hypertext referencing and comes back into the fold of the current AA conversation. Most virtual spaces I studied were lacking in programmatic, let alone civic ambition.
The first, I would say, whoa, everyone's staring at me. It's
Full house.
It's like the first full hour experience.
Fire goes. Fresh meat, yeah.
These spaces felt designed to inhibit meaningful discourse and were anxiety-inducing, a more immersive nightmare following the current bad behavior pervading the internet culture due to lack of identity authentication. Of all of the social VR spaces I visited, Harvest 114 felt markedly different. Through these artifacts placed around the room, I felt connected to the individual who designed it, as if the room was acting as their avatar. I felt like I was looking into the mind of another person, which felt more authentic than any other experiences I had in virtual environments thus far. The success of the space in expressing identity demonstrated the need for individuals to have the capability to display themselves in virtual spaces as their repository of experiences, investigations, and content. There must be a persistent virtual identity of users through which they can collect and carry with them their virtual belongings. This accredited virtual identity would grow through the characteristic model, which tracks executive functions and allows the user to display their preferred amount of self. This persistent model builds on the sampled interactions of identity, impression, communications, content, time, and location management. With such vast amounts of data flowing into this virtual repository, how can we design novel ways of recording and relating to data and information? Applying cybernetic theory to the act of conversation between agents, I created a model to translate verbal conversation into a visual medium. My goal in this spatial experiment was to understand if the visualization of your participation would change your behavior. Each agent was given a color, and when they spoke, their color was deployed into the global environment. Initially, it was deployed at 10% opacity, and as they continued to participate, it increased in opacity. This mode of translation generated visual models of these conversations where typology started to emerge. The goal of the Immersive Amanuensis is to support the AA public through an architecture of protocols that record and make accessible the conversations of human and non-human agents through a framework of relational data. The framework must abide by these tenets. The structure must be self-organized from within the public to support diverse conversation typologies, allow for identity and impression management of individuals, groups, and the institution at large, provide sampled channels for agents to transmit content internally and externally to the public with different levels of curation, and allow these sampled agents to become gates for new members to enter the public through the permeability they provide to the defined boundary. In the acknowledgement that social capital plays a significant role in information exchange at the AA, and without it, the flow of transmission is diminished, we devised an environmental experiment to see if authentic social exchange could be created in virtual space, on which we could potentially begin to build the infrastructure of information exchange. The AA Square is a social gathering space for its public. It was designed to break the frame of the Zoom cells in which we have all been imprisoned. It met enough of the criteria for virtual civic spaces to enable meaningful social interaction, but was an early form proof of concept. The Immersive Amanuensis must provide both the framework of communications channels that support social interaction and a framework for the recording and visualization of individual and collective information contribution. If we draw the comparison between light and knowledge, a person can be seen as the incident through which knowledge is transmitted, similarly to light falling upon a surface. We cannot see light as it moves. Only when it falls upon and fundamentally changes the material on which it has touched can we perceive it. Knowledge is mediated differently through the diverse constructed realities of different people, and light will reflect and refract differently depending on the material it touches. If we treat the minds of the AA public as the medium through which knowledge and information are written and mediated, then generating new tools for the understanding and study of this process could produce a new situational awareness of the material and semiotic networks of which we are everyday agents. Using existing architectural conditions and affordances as portals, the Immersive Amanuensis is initialized. As users move through the space, their individual library of conversations grows. The relational metadata that each conversation is tagged with creates pivot points for navigation. Data transitions to information through the construction of relationships between them, and transitions to knowledge as these comparisons develop depth. In the Immersive Amanuensis, conversations become objects of and for memory. The individual and collective create new pathways through space and time. We demand tools for navigating the sea-level rise of data. By placing conversations into their relational context, we will create a hyperlinked network of information and knowledge, where our civic ambition to record and make accessible these interactions plays out to dramatic effect. As all agents of an institution become active members in the accredited interpretation and authorship of content, the dynamic relationship of self to community is brought into sharper focus as the nuance of this liminal zone becomes a space of investigation. The institutional archive of the future will no longer be home to the Archon, but home to the Amanuensis.